I want more women to understand how powerful the words you use towards yourself are, because how you speak to your body is how you treat your body. And today I want to connect your self-talk to the choices that you make and how those choices are going to affect your overall health and your goals. First, as always, if you are new to the show, I'm Gavin Scribolito. I am a functional health coach, and I help women to stop fighting their bodies and actually start understanding them. And my mission is to really make health, nutrition, training, and mindset seem simple and doable. Here, we use language that is going to build behavior, not break it. And I have helped over 200 women now transform their body, mindset, and their overall health using our root method that is going to address the root cause of underlying issues to actually help your body finally respond and heal. So, without further ado, today I want to talk about how your perception is going to drive your practices, and your practices are going to then shape your body's physiology and your overall health. And a lot of what this comes down to is breaking things down all the way to where's the root of this problem stemming from, and how is that problem showing up in other areas of your health, your life. And when it comes to our self-talk and the words that we use to describe ourselves to ourselves, that is not something that can be taken lightly, because it will impact your body. Your body is going to respond to that, because what we have to understand is that that is going to roll over into your body feeling like it's under threat. If you've ever been bullied or, beat up or anything going through life, you know how threatening that can feel. And I remember when I was getting bullied through high school, it was probably one of the worst experiences ever. Now, obviously, it definitely shaped me and, character development. But at the end of the day, there was a point in time where I used to have to live on Mylanta, which was like a kind of gut soothing, like over-the-counter medicine, because I would have chronic stomach pain on a day-to-day basis just because of the stress that I had about going to school the next day. And not everybody falls into that boat, but that became extremely debilitating down the road later in years of life, because I had severe gut problems as I grew up. And that's something that I still deal with, I still manage and battle. So this is no different. Now, what we have to really set the frame with to understand is that the labels that we use to describe ourselves are going to become our limits. So if you say things like I am lazy, or I will never lose weight, or you start to tell yourself maybe that you're not skinny enough, meanwhile you've lost a significant amount of weight, what's going to happen is your brain is going to work to now prove that story. That's the problem. And then from there, once your brain has this feedback that it got that it's not where it needs to be, and that you feel this way towards yourself, it's not only going to prove that to you to make sure that it finds more information to actually filter to make sure that it actually supports that story that you're telling yourself. This is actually a mechanism in your brain. It's called the reticular activating system. It's RAS. I might have said that wrong, but same concept. This actually is a part of your brain that will literally filter information and biases to make sure that it proves what you believe true. And what you believe is what you're telling yourself the most. So it literally becomes your lens that you see everything through. And this is where things like anorexia, start to kind of arise with, that obviously that severe of a problem. Now, when we have these patterns with our thoughts, and that your brain is now proving it, we have your behavior that's going to follow that identity. So those harsh words can invite even harsher strategies. So when you're telling yourself that you're not working hard enough, even though maybe you are already in the gym 5-6 days a week, and you're already trying to cut carbs and being super already hard on yourself, what this can start to do when you tell yourself that you're not disciplined and you're fat, you're lazy, well, now you're going to likely start to starve yourself more. You're going to start to train harder, train more than you already are likely, and you're going to rest a lot less. And for somebody who is already in a boat of doing like exercising more and eating less, that can be extremely debilitating to your overall health, not just from a physical standpoint, but also a mental standpoint. Now, where things start to get messy is that your body's going to respond to this signal. And like I had mentioned before, your body's going to take this as a threat. So you have chronic stress that's going to arise. You have poor sleep that can arise because of some of those practices that you're insinuating. Also, though, the rumination of thoughts that are likely running through your head about how you feel about yourself is probably going to also play a role in keeping you up at night. We have irregular hunger patterns, and then we have stalled progress. So now it's like this negative feedback loop that just keeps feeding even worse into that initial thought of, I am not enough and I need to work harder, I'm fat, I'm lazy. It literally becomes this incessant cycle that just never ends until you finally end it. Now, there's a lot of ways that negative self-talk like this can actually show up in your body. And when we have this type of a stress response, something we have to really take into account is not only is there activation from the brain side of things and from our cognitive overall side, where your brain is literally filtering information to prove what you believe true, but we also have a gut to brain axis where your brain is directly connected to your gut, and how your mental health state is, it's going to reflect that into your gut. And this is where we actually have seen this in research, where depression from a mental side of things is usually intrinsically linked with gut health issues. Maybe that's irregular bowel movements, bloating, constipation, sometimes diarrhea. I've had this for years, where when I was extremely depressed growing up through my, later teens, early 20s, that was where my gut problems were the most prominent. And a lot of that, like I had mentioned, comes down to where I was, getting bullied, and I had gut problems even starting then, just because of that. I mean, we can see this in so many instances where we get butterflies, we get excited, and we get like those butterflies in our stomach, right? Like you get nervous mentally because of how your thoughts are rolling over. Maybe you're on a first date or something like that, and you get the butterflies in your stomach. There's this connection, right? We have to understand that connection is always happening, and then your gut is connected to every single organ, every single gland, every single part of your body, the same way that your brain is. So we have these two areas that play a role into everything else in your body that are going to become impacted by the stress response that is happening. So that critical internal dialogue is going to keep your nervous system on this sense of high alert, because it again feels like it's threatened. And when that happens, that's going to obviously spike our stress hormone cortisol, right, which we've talked about plenty of times now. Obviously, in a balance, it's a good hormone. We need it. It's a circadian hormone. It's a stress hormone. It helps keep us safe and also get us out into that fight or flight mode when we need it. But the problem arises where that fight or flight mode becomes so consistent and we stay stuck in that fight or flight mode, and now your nervous system is never actually truly regulating itself, and that can start to impact recovery, that can start to impact digestion, that can start to impact your immune system. And then from there, we have it obviously starting to impact things like your metabolism and your appetite. Now, everyone has different appetite kind of fluctuations from this. For some people, stress actually causes them to undereat and not feel hungry at all and lose their appetite. For others, it might actually drive higher cravings and drive them to continue to eat more. And that could look like restricting and binging episodes, for example. But what can usually happen from this is we're going to see poor sleep usually get impacted, because from a recovery standpoint, if your practices are following suit with any sort of overtraining due to the fact of where your thoughts are, that can obviously start to impact recovery. That impacted recovery can directly influence your ability to get into a deep enough sleep. If you're on the side of things where maybe your thoughts are so debilitating that you're not even doing anything, because it's like a paralysis by analysis and you just feel like, what's the point of even starting? That can still, again, start to roll over into even worse, mental health outcomes, which can still also roll over into poor sleep due to rumination of thoughts. There's so many ways that this can show up in your life. So there's really no one way, fits all approach here. But that poor sleep and that stress can obviously blunt satiety signals. So sometimes that might mean more cravings. Sometimes that might mean that you undereat more, like I had said. Either way, those are both going to be, actions that are going to be debilitating to your body. That could look like evening snacking. It could look like skipping meals. That's going to obviously then start to impact your training quality, right? Because if you are obviously choosing, less than ideal food choices, or maybe not eating enough, now we have both of those modes of action impacting energy levels, and that can impact your training quality. Down the line, or even first up front, depending on the situation, we have obviously the cycle and your gut health, which are going to be intrinsically connected. So as a female, you are very susceptible to cycle irregularities. Your menstrual cycle, we have to keep in mind, is literally like a gold standard of your health, right? So when you ideally have a healthy cycle, it's a good, indication like, hey, you're fertile. That means your body is safe. If your body did not feel safe, and I believe we talked about this in a past episode, if your body did not feel safe, it would not feel safe enough to conceive, in which case it would decrease its chances of actually being fertile enough to reproduce a child in most cases. So this is where we start to show up in cases of cycle irregularities due to these practices and these perceptions that you may have about yourself, because your body does not feel safe. And it does not feel safe, then it is not going to want to obviously grow a child inside of it. So this obviously can sometimes show up as mood swings. Obviously, you have constipation, excessive bloating. Irregular cycles could look like extreme PMS symptoms. Sometimes this can also roll over into obvious hormonal imbalances. We can see progesterone tank because of this stress due to the elevated cortisol. We can see testosterone either start to tank or sometimes even increase due to wherever insulin signaling might be. So there's a lot of things that are going to be very common that we can start to see in lab work when your body doesn't actually feel safe. Now, I've had this experience firsthand, and I noticed that the worse that I spoke to myself, the harsher that I acted. I ended up getting to a point where I would starve myself. I overtrained. I don't talk about this very, often, but there was a point where I was also bulimic. This was kind of like the height of like when I was in bodybuilding, and I would be super strict throughout the week, and then I would literally overindulge in the weekend, purge, do it all over again. It was an incessant restrict and binge cycle to the point where my cheat meals, which I hate that word, turned into cheat days, and then I would literally at the end of the day just throw it all up. It was awful. It literally was getting to the point where it was actually killing me, because I went to a doctor and he told me that I had so many ulcers lining my esophagus that like if I kept doing it, I probably would tear my esophagus open. I said, oh, cool. That's awesome. That was exactly what I needed to hear in that moment, because right after that appointment, I was like, I'm done. I don't want to die for this. And sometimes we need that, to be honest. Sometimes we need that swift kick in the ass, if I'm being real. Like, I can't tell you how many times when my clients come to me, get labs, and like they were struggling to stay consistent. All of a sudden we got some poor lab work, and it was like a kick in the ass, and then they started crushing their goals. This is where we have to understand where motivation lies, and that it doesn't always feel super exciting to be motivated. Sometimes it's looking in the mirror, not being happy with where you're at, or it's, having a doctor tell you that your health is at risk, or getting really bad lab work back. That is also motivation to change. But we want to do that in a positive way, not in a way where we are doing it out of hate, or we need to like do extreme measures to try to, fix it as soon as possible. It's baby steps, right? And that's exactly what I did at that time. Was I just started to take steps away from what I was doing and towards things that were likely going to be better for my health and my mindset. And that was where I really focused, was obviously working on my mindset. And that started with the language that I was using towards myself. Things like, oh, I'm too soft, or oh, I'm still too fat, even though I had veins rippling through my abs. And I would always tell myself, I'm never good enough. I need to be further. And, this is where body dysmorphia gets really, really dangerous, because no matter how lean I got, I kept seeing like that dude that was like 40 pounds overweight still. And this was a massive reason why I work on mindset throughout a transformation with all of my clients, because if you have those negative, debilitating, deprecating thoughts when you're overweight, and you don't work on them as you lose weight to learn to love yourself, they're still going to be there when you lose the weight. And this is where a lot of people think that like losing weight is going to make them happy. But in reality, if you're not happy with where you're at that point, and you're like really harsh to yourself, you're just going to be harsher to yourself as you start to lose weight, because those thoughts don't go away. But just overall, we have to understand there's a cost to this, right? That's the whole gist of it. We have to understand that there's a cost. It's going to affect your body. It's going to affect your health. And until we have that shift where you start to change the words that you use towards yourself, change the language that you're using to actually start to respect your body the same way that I did, then your behaviors will follow. Then your brain starts to actually shift gears into a different identity, and the physiology of your body will start to change. It's going to all reflect back. Your thoughts start with everything. That's literally where it all starts, is your thoughts. If we are having poor health issues, a lot of times I can guarantee you, sitting down with anybody that's having poor health, I can find somewhere in your life where it either was stemmed from the way that you talk to yourself, and that led to certain practices being ensued, or there was something that you did from a overall practice standpoint, whether a thought, drove it, or it was just something that you believed was something you had to do. At the end of the day, even in that case, it's still coming back to a thought that you had, a belief that you have that drove that practice that put you into the state of where your physiology is at. And that, again, can show up in a lot of different ways for a lot of different people. But at the end of the day, we have to start with the words that we're using. We have to start with the behaviors that we are actually, having follow that, and understand how that is playing into your current health. And if you are somebody that's having a health issue, I think dialing that back to look at okay, cool, I'm having this issue. Where in my life am I currently having a problem? Where in my life is there a practice that might be kind of contributing to that problem, right? If we have poor lab work back, okay, cool. Wow, what am I looking at? Obviously it can be very tricky to actually read labs. Unfortunately, a lot of doctors don't even accurately read labs. So, it's actually being able to, find somebody that can actually help you connect the dots and then understand, okay, cool, what are the right questions to be asked to actually be able to look deeper into your lifestyle, your thoughts, your belief patterns, to understand where is this all stemming from, and then we address the root of that. Okay, which is going to be where are your thoughts, where are your beliefs. Now, as always, a few quick kind of actionable steps that you can take here is going to obviously be, starting to create more awareness. Awareness is key. If we aren't aware that there is a problem, you're never going to actually be able to fix anything because you don't think there's a problem. So we have to start with awareness. Once we have awareness around where are your thoughts, where is there something in your life right now where it could be, a way you don't feel good. Maybe it was something like lab work, or maybe you're having health issues. Where in your day-to-day life are there practices that could be contributing to that? Are we overtraining or undertraining? Are you under-eating or overeating? Are you getting poor sleep? Where's your self-talk? Is it negative and self-deprecating, or do you feel like you talk to yourself in a neutral and grounding tone? Where are these things starting to lie? Where's your stressors, right? Because your stressors are going to directly impact your overall body and your health. Now, once we have awareness around that, if there is any self-deprecating thoughts and language you're using towards yourself, you want to kind of try to think, okay, cool, what's a neutral replacement line, right? So if you're being really harsh to yourself and you're saying I'm lazy, or I'm fat, I'm disgusting, we want to kind of shift that. You don't always want to shift to a positive thing, because sometimes that's not always going to feel, very authentic. It feels like you're lying to yourself. We need to find something that is more of a neutral statement that you can't tie an emotion to this, right? So maybe that looks like, if you're saying I'm lazy, that could look like I am learning consistency one choice at a time, right? There's nothing you can't tell yourself no, I'm not. It's not like you're saying I'm ugly and you're trying to tell yourself you're beautiful. We don't want to do that massive a jump because it doesn't feel authentic. It doesn't feel true to you. We need to find neutral grounding terms that are going to anchor you into a statement that you cannot connect a negative or a positive connotation to. It's just neutral. It's right there, right? The more you can shift all your language into that way, the more you're going to actually learn to be able to be comfortable with these thoughts, and it's going to start to show up in your brain, where your brain starts to actually calm down, starts to calm yourself, as opposed to feeling it's under threat so much, right? From here, we want to kind of start to build a little bit of safety ground rules, right? Calming your system with things like, sleep, good food intake, right? So making sure you're having balanced meals, good protein sources, nutrient-dense carb sources like fruits and vegetables. We want to make sure that we are supporting your body from a health side of things as much as possible, especially from the nutrition side of things. Now, I think from there, having some check-ins with yourself can be extremely helpful. That might look like one sentence you spoke to yourself and one sentence on how your body felt. Or maybe that looks like, hey, I noticed I had this thought today. What's a reframe that I'd like to use in the future when I have this thought come up that could be neutral and grounding, as opposed to so, threatening and debilitating, right? So we can kind of tie that back a little bit. Now, as always, what you are seeing here is literally our root method in action. We have recover, which is regulating your stress with kinder language, better sleep, and simple routines. We have optimization, which is fueling your body consistently so it can actually believe you, not just what your thoughts are saying. Yeah, and that might look like, protein with each meal, a fruit and a vegetable with each meal, or just, smarter carbs, and making sure you're fueling your training, you're fueling your body throughout the day. From there, we have overcome, which is obviously going to come down to you replacing any sort of all or nothing talk with specific next steps. So kind of almost like talking to yourself like a coach, genuinely sit there and talk yourself through these things. It sounds crazy, but believe me, the more you can talk to yourself, the same way you would talk to a friend, you start to actually come from a better place towards yourself. And then obviously transform. So as your identity is shifting, we're going to have actions that are going to feel more authentic. They're going to line up better with your goals, and you're going to start to feel better because of this. And that's going to stick. And then obviously the trend is going to start to change because the input is changing. So as always, I hope that you got something out of this show. If this helped you rethink how you speak to yourself at all, subscribe on your favorite platform so you never miss an episode. Share this with a friend, because you never know what they may be going through, and it just might change her week. If you learn something, please, as always, leave a quick rating and a 1-sentence review with your biggest takeaway. It helps a lot more women to actually find the show, and that can obviously help them to change their lives as well. Screenshot this episode and tag me on Instagram and tell me your new replacement line. I will read every new message. Resources and next steps are in the description. You, my friend, are built for better, and I will see you in the next one.